Right. Well, let me hit my record button. There we go. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm so happy to see you all. I hope everyone had a wonderful 4th of July holiday. Um, and tonight, this is the Neighborhood Passions Affinity Network presented by Google, Piedmont Gas, and Neighbor to Neighbor. I will be your host, Valerie O.T. Nellis. And tonight, we're going to focus on one of the 8 key passions, caring for our neighbors. And our topic is, what is conservatorship? And does my neighbor need it? Talking to us tonight about that is Amy Bryant, a consummate professional, an attorney, and has the heart for public service and leadership. Amy has been a reflection of her professionalism and passion during her many years of legal practice. Amy is excited to serve Metro Davidson County and Nashville's community for individuals with disabilities as the Office of Conservatorship Management Director. She views this as a tremendous opportunity to combine her professional expertise with her passion for protecting Nashville's vulnerable adults. This Memphis native is a Tennessee State University alum, go Big Blue, and with a bachelor's of business administration in economics and finance. Amy continued her education by obtaining her Juris Doctorate from St. Louis University School of Law. We're so excited to have you here. And Amy, conservatorship is a hot topic right now. We have all heard about the Britney Spears situation. So tell us, Amy, what is a conservatorship?
Okay, thanks for that wonderful introduction, Valerie. A conservatorship is an appointment by a judge for an adult to make decisions for another adult once that adult has been determined to have an incapacity or a disability. And that determination has to be based on clear and convincing evidence through the courts. So, what that means is the judge must have enough information to determine that that individual lacks the ability to make a decision either over their person or over their property. And then a decision can be made whether that individual requires a conservator. And then, if so, what rights and responsibilities will be removed from the person with the disability and then given to the conservator. And so in the state of Tennessee, we have 2 different types of conservatorship. You can have a conservatorship over your person or a conservatorship over your property. And the conservator over the person will make decisions regarding their day-to-day living, medical decisions, where they're living, and what type of meds they can be administered, if they can be admitted or discharged from a hospital. And then if you're conservator over a person's property, you're making decisions with regard to their assets and how they are managing their money on a day-to-day basis.
Well, so I guess in the case of Britney Spears, was youth kind of because she was too young to make decisions, and that's I know you were not personally involved in that situation,
Right,
but
right.
I mean I'm trying to figure out kind of what would be the reason for.
Right. So I know that a lot of people think that conservatorships are for the elderly. And
Mhm.
in fact, conservatorships are for any adult that has an incapacity or disability. And therefore, there are many individuals under conservatorship that are Britney Spears' age or younger. If you think to individuals that may have Down syndrome or advanced autism, where they're lower on the spectrum, once they reach the age of 18, their parents typically get conservatorships for them so they can continue to make decisions for them. And so there are many people within that category. There are also individuals who may have a traumatic brain injury due to an accident in a car or some sort of other accident, whereby they may have to have a conservatorship so that someone can make decisions for them. In the case of Brittany, I've looked into it. I did another panel where we had to discuss the case. It is very difficult to know what Brittany's incapacity or disability is due to the confidentiality of her case. And Brittany's case is under seal as well. So most information that you may hear about her case would be speculation from people in the media about one thing or another based on what was leaked from her hearing. Um, and so I can't really speculate as to what her disability may be, but she
Mhm.
could have some sort of mental condition that prohibits her from being able to make decisions for herself to keep her from harming herself. Uh,
Right.
but there's no way to know that for sure.
So if we, if you, what are the things you're looking for if we have a neighbor and we kind of think, well, maybe they need some help? I mean, what are
Mhm.
the signs and symptoms of really thinking about helping someone in that way?
One of the things you could look for is if a person gets lost often. So sometimes you may have a neighbor who drives, but they have the inability to get back home. That's a close sign, or something that people see sometimes. Another thing would be if they're being taken advantage of by scammers. And sometimes that is very hard to see, especially if a person is home alone. That's difficult for you to see if they're being taken advantage of. But if you see individuals coming in and out of a person's home that you wouldn't normally see coming in and out of a home, that could be a sign as well. Another sign could be that they're just not taking care of themselves. So you may have a neighbor that you may see in the same clothes day after day after day, and they're not taking care of themselves, or they may forget who you are or forget where they are, or something of that nature. When it comes to a young person, it may be a little bit more difficult for a person to identify that. So what the court is looking for is a determination by a doctor that this person has some sort of mental incapacity where they can't make a decision for themselves. And so sometimes it's kind of hard to see unless you're seeing that person on the day-to-day basis or interacting with them frequently so that you can identify that change.
What is the process for actually achieving a conservatorship?
So in the state of Tennessee, by statute, anyone can file a petition for a conservatorship in the probate court. In Davidson County, that's the probate court. So that's circuit court, 7th Circuit Court, or 2nd Circuit Court if it's an emergency. And so the process is filing a petition. As part of that petition, you're required to have a report of a physician form completed by a medical professional. That's either by a psychologist, psychiatrist, or a doctor. It cannot be done by a nurse practitioner or any other medical professional. In addition to that, there's a hearing. So if the conservatorship is an emergency conservatorship, that hearing has to be held within 5 days. And with an emergency conservatorship, the person with the disability or the person that's alleged to have the disability is appointed a lawyer for them. That person is called an attorney ad litem. That person is advocating for them on all emergencies because of how fast that conservatorship happens. And then upon that hearing, the judge determines if the conservatorship should take place. And then if so, that emergency conservatorship only lasts for 60 days because it happens within 5 days. For a traditional conservatorship, a petition is filed, the report of physician comes in, the judge typically will appoint a guardian ad litem. That is a lawyer, that is the eyes and ears of the court. They complete a report. So what they will do, they will interview all interested parties. So that could be family members, friends, caregivers. If they're in a facility, they will interview the people in the facility. They would also look into that person's assets to determine all the information that the court may need in order to make that decision. And then there's a hearing, and the judge has a hearing to hear the information that's presented by the petitioner, and also any information presented by the person with the disability if they disagree with it. And then at the conclusion of that hearing, the judge determines if that person has an incapacity or a disability. If so, if that incapacity or disability renders them unable to make decisions, then if so, what type of decisions they should have, what type of decision-making powers they should have removed from them. And then that a conservator should be appointed over either their person or property or both. And then a person is identified. And by statute, there's a hierarchy of people who are identified as conservators. And so it's your spouse, and then your children, and then next of kin, and then friends and family members would come after that. And so typically within Tennessee, there are family members who are appointed as conservators for the person with a disability.
Mm-hmm. So are there's a lot of processes involved.
Mhm.
So are there, I guess, the safeguards? How do you prevent someone from inappropriately ascertaining a conservatorship?
Okay, that's a really good question that I get asked often. So in the state of Tennessee, the first thing is that if a person with a disability opposes the conservatorship, they're automatically appointed an attorney ad litem. So that's the first thing. And so that person is appointed to advocate for them. Second, the guardian ad litem is a person that's appointed, and it's not that's not like a position that anyone holds. Those are individual lawyers that are appointed by judges. So there is not like a one person that's doing it for every single case. So that's helpful in that respect. Then, like I said, you also have to have a physician stating that that individual lacks incapacity or disability before a conservatorship is appointed to an individual. After that, there are safeguards in place after the conservatorship is put in place. For one, if a person with a disability no longer feels that they need that conservatorship, they can call the court, they can write the court, or they can call our office. I work for the Office of Conservatorship Management, and we will relay that information to the court to get their case set for a review hearing to determine if they still need that conservatorship. In addition to that, well, you asked about obtaining a conservatorship that's not needed, but there are other safeguards once the conservatorship is in place to make sure that person is being appropriately cared for within that conservatorship, to make sure that those fiduciary responsibilities are met by that person.
Yes. So do you have many of them that are overturned? You know, people have a conservatorship, they decide, well, I don't need it anymore. Do many of them get overturned?
I can't say many. We don't keep stats on the number of conservatorships that are terminated. However, what I will say is that there are many instances in which an emergency conservatorship is that will not become a full conservatorship due to that person regaining their regaining their capacity or overcoming disability. There have been cases where people who may have been young when they received their conservatorship, like in their early 20s, and they're older now. Some may be in their 30s after 10 years of being on the appropriate meds and getting everything in order. They are no longer required to be on a conservatorship. It really just depends on the incapacity or the disability, and then what's required for that person to no longer be under conservatorship.
Yeah. Well, how many in a year's time do you all typically are there applied for conservatorships typically?
Now that number, I don't know. What I will say, in Davidson County, we have 2,400 conservatorships that our office manages. And so oversees all the conservatorships within Davidson County. I was asked this question before, and that would be something that the probate court clerk's office would have a better idea of. And the reason I don't know is that unless a petition is filed and it becomes a conservatorship, I won't know about it. And so there are some petitions that are filed and those conservatorships are not granted. And so I don't know that number, but I could get back to you with that number if somebody needs that number.
The number, no. So, you're the Office of Management.
Yes,
and so what is the management of a conservatorship? I mean, once one's in place, what do you do?
Okay. Conservator has a list of fiduciary responsibilities depending on the rights that they have been given. The number one thing that a conservator is charged with doing is making decisions that are in the best interest of the person with the disability. And I know in some states, not Tennessee, the conservator is charged with substituted judgment, whereby the conservator is making a decision that the person with the disability would make. But in Tennessee, we use the best interest standard. They also use that in California too, by the way. And then the person that's the conservator has to file an annual status report. So their first status report is due 6 months from the date of appointment. That status report is a form provided by the court whereby the conservator is letting the court know that that person still requires a conservatorship, what their disability or incapacity is, where the person with the disability is located, where the conservator is located, and that has to be submitted to the court with 6 months after the appointment. Then it's submitted to the court annually thereafter, that same information. They're also charged with updating the court if the person with the disability moves or if the conservator moves, so that the court can get in contact with them should they need to. If you are conservator over the property, then you're responsible for having a bond. That bond amount is set by the court, and that will be based on a percentage of the person's assets, so that if that person does go away with the money or inappropriately manages that person's money, the bond can pay. So it's like an insurance policy for the amount of money. The conservator is required to file an inventory within 60 days of appointment, and that's an inventory to the court of every asset that that person has. And then the conservators also has to provide a property management plan, which is a budget. And so they have to outline the amount of money that comes in for the person with a disability each month, and how that money will be spent thereafter for that year on a monthly basis. And then they are required to file an annual accounting based on the information provided when they first became conservator. And so that accounting is sort of like a register, like a checkbook registry, where you show the beginning balance and all the assets that that person had at the beginning. And then you show everything that was spent, provide receipts and deliverables for everything that came out of the account, and then provide the ending balance and explain any discrepancies that you find within. And those documents are reviewed by the clerk's office. And in Davidson County, they're reviewed by the probate master. She is a lawyer that works for Judge Kennedy, that reviews the accountings to make sure there are no discrepancies. So she's a second eye. And then our office, the Office of Conservatorship Management, reviews every case that has an accounting. And so the distinction between our office and the clerk's office and the probate master is our office receives information directly from the financial institutions. So the conservator is charged with providing bank statements and credit card statements and financial statements to the clerk's office. Well, those can be altered if they're trying to hide something. So our office gets that information directly from the bank themselves. So we request the information from the bank and we review it to determine if there are any discrepancies in that.
You said that they have to help maintain the physical well-being of this person. How are you all checking that? I hear you talking a lot about the financial management, but who's checking on the person's physical well-being?
So the Office of Conservatorship has a partnership with Metro Social Services, and there are workers there that report to my office. We do welfare visits and home visits for the individuals under conservatorship within Davidson County. And so the court chooses 50 of those randomly every quarter for us to review. We also will review a conservatorship case. If someone calls our office and has some sort of complaint about a conservator, we will do a welfare review for them. And the welfare review consists of us requesting the medical records for that individual, reviewing those medical records to determine if that person has met their dentist appointments on time, their eye appointments on time, and anything else within their medical records, like their medicines, and any other doctors that they may have to go to. And so we will look at that to make sure that the follow-up has been done. And then we'll also go to their homes. Now, during COVID, we didn't go to anybody's homes. We to either use Zoom or FaceTime, or to send us real-time pictures of the individual with the disability, or we would go to the home and look at them from the porch. But we didn't go inside of their home, just so that we could lay eyes on them to make sure that person was being cared for appropriately.
Sure. Well, it seems like a very successful program. Yes?
Yes, it's a very successful program. It's a young program. This office was created in 2014, and it's only been around for about 7 years, but it's a very successful program. It's my goal to create more OCMs within the state. Davidson County is the only county with an Office of Conservatorship Management. So these services are only provided to Davidson County residents. They're provided to any residents outside of Davidson County. If a person under conservatorship lives in another county, we can't even go to their home. So if they live in Smyrna, or if they live in Cheatham County or any of the surrounding counties, we don't visit them. We still review their cases, but we don't go to their home.
What made Davidson County initiate the program here here in the city?
Back in 2013 and 2012, there was also a lot of chatter about conservatorships back then. And back then there was a review of the public guardian. We had a public guardian in the city that had several conservatorships. I believe she had over 100 conservatorships back then. And so they were reviewing her administration of the conservatorships. In addition to that, there was a lawyer, his name was John Clemens, who had conservatorship over 5 individuals, and he was taking money from them. And so he has been charged criminally, and he is serving, I believe, 18 years in prison for the amount of money that he took from the individuals that he was charged with protecting.
Mhm.
I can't speak to exactly how that happened, but I will say that he had conservatorships in Rutherford County and Davidson County, and he was doing it to doing it to the individuals in both counties. And so as part of that, Judge Kennedy asked for a task force to be created to look into conservatorships to see how we can prevent something like that from happening. And then based on the task force recommendations, an office was charged to be created. Initially, I think the office was going to be an office whereby our office served as conservator for individuals. However, it was after they went through putting the office together, it was determined that it would be best for an oversight office to be put in place so that we can have more eyes and ears on the ground looking at each individual conservatorship. And so then this office was born.
Right. So is this legislated, this office?
No, it was promulgated by Metro Council, and Mayor Carl Dean put it in place.
And excellent. Wow, there's a lot of great information. Thank you. I don't want to hog the whole time. So, ladies and gentlemen, do you all have any questions for Amy?
I do. I have a question. So, I guess when you said about the guy with the fraud or spending their money, so is there a set salary for that person that's been the conservator, or do they set a salary, or does a court set a salary for that person to be paid?
So it depends. In many conservatorships, the conservator is not paid. So the payments for a conservator are based on the assets of the individual that have it. So if they would like to be paid for their services, they can. However, that amount comes from the person with the disability. So if the person with the disability doesn't have any money, typically there is no payment coming from any place. All payments to conservators must be approved by the court. All investments must be approved by the court. If they want to sell property, that must also be approved by the court, not only the sale, but the amount of the sale. And so some conservators are paid, but it just depends. I would say I know the majority of conservators are not paid within Davidson County.
Yes. Yes, go ahead, Alma.
Amy, you have done an excellent job of explaining this. I'm a lawyer that practiced in Wichita, Kansas, and I generally limited my practice to probate. So I did a lot of conservatorships, and I started back in 1983, which is a long time ago. And I saw Kansas make great improvements. When I first started practicing, there was no requirement that someone would have a guardian ad litem. And some real abuses took place. And finally, they did some work. But I've had good close experience with Judge Kennedy, and I know he's doing a great job. I'm not surprised that he came up with setting up your office, and same with Mayor Carl Dean. But I want to ask you about some terms. Do you know if Tennessee ever used the term award, like the person that's the subject of a guardianship or a conservatorship? Are they called award in Tennessee, or just the person under the conservatorship? And I noticed you didn't use the term guardian. In Kansas law still, and I'm still licensed there, although I never intend to go back there and practice, they still use the term if I become, like if I had a stroke tonight and my daughter wanted to be in charge of my medical care, physical care, in Kansas, she would be called a guardian, and to take care of my money, she would be called a conservator. And those two terms were not the same at all. Evidently, you're using conservatorship for both in Tennessee. But have you ever heard the person that's subject of the conservatorship be called a ward? Like the ward?
Yes, I have. The person with the disability used to be called a ward. I'm not exactly sure when that changed. But by statute now they're called a respondent. And so I typically will call them respondent. In Tennessee, both conservators over person and property are called conservator. However, in many states, probably most states, a guardian is used for conservator over the person. And then in some states, guardian is also used for conservator over the property, but I know in several states, there's a distinction between the two. In Tennessee, guardian is only used for minors.
Well, I was glad you used that term about guardian ad litem, because I saw some real abuse take place when I first started practicing. I had a stepson that was trying to take advantage of his stepmother.
Mhm.
And, you know, I had to go to the judge privately and say, hey, there's some bad stuff going on here. But the new law helped a lot when they revamped their law. But I want to tell all of y'all that are listening, I know from experience, Amy is good. She did a great job explaining this. I was listening and making notes and, you know, thinking, dang, she's good. We're lucky to have you, Amy. Thank you for being in Nashville and helping our people. And I do watch my neighbors. Today, I was with a woman who's even older than me, and we were at the library and she lost her car and she could not remember what floor it was on or anything. And I'm worried about her, and I'm going to call her son and say, she's not all right. She's 85 and still driving by herself. And she got in there, but she didn't seem to be able to get out. And, you know, you should pay attention to people like that, and you're helping their family to tell them that, you know, this person needs help. But, and I love it that y'all are talking about watching your neighbors, because, you know, you see people, and if they don't look right, like you said, if they're wearing the same clothes every time you see them for 2 weeks, you know, there's something wrong. But thank you. I enjoyed this so much. I signed up to see what is Tennessee doing, but you just did a super job.
Oh, thank you, Alma.
So happy. I'm going to tell Judge Kennedy that he and I are friends, and I'm going to tell him I'm impressed with you.
Please do. Please do.
Thank you, Alma.
The way I met him, I worked in his campaign to get him elected. So that's how I know him.
Well, I have a question in the chat. Amy, is an accountant required to be made by the conservator of finances?
Yes, an accounting is required unless that is waived. It can be waived by the judge, depending on, typically Judge Kennedy will waive it if the person only receives Social Security income. If they're receiving about $12,000 or less per year, then an accounting is not required. If they ask for it to be waived, then he will waive it.
Ed, you have a question?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I wanted to let Alma know, judges in Tennessee have the discretion to waive the guardian ad litem as well. And in some cases, the guardian ad litem is waived. And so that's typically done in cases where the parent of a child with a disability that's now reached the age of 18 will continue to be taking care of that child. And so that they won't have that expense, or that is not necessary, then a guardian ad litem may be waived in those instances.
Okay.
Well, and I saw older people that would have a stroke and then they'd go through rehab and get back and be all right. So I was able to restore several, and we call them wards, back to their rights, and, you know, get rid of the conservatorship because they, you know, got their, whatever the disability was resolved, and they were able to get it. That's one to think about. And when I would explain to people what is a conservatorship, I would, you know, use them, like if their grandmother had a stroke and couldn't write her checks and you wanted to do that. And then I did a lot of estate work as well. But I'm just so tickled. I've signed up tonight. I don't even know why I signed up. I don't need to learn more about it, but I just
well, we're glad you're here.
See what Davidson County was doing, and I see you're doing well. I'm really proud to hear this.
Thank you. Ed, is your hand up?
Yes. Three things. Number one, I grew up in St. Louis. At Granite City to Crestwood Arc was we wore that out, and so it's nice to have somebody in the room that is from my old stomping ground. The second thing is when I was in graduate school, we talked about the Oscar Mayer hot dog kit. Little kid sitting on the pier with a fishing pole singing about the Oscar Mayer wieners, and he made about $1 million doing that. So I'm wondering if what would have been set up for him at age 10 would have been a conservatorship or something else. And thirdly, when I was working in the trust department of the bank when I was in graduate school, a client of the bank, a trust client, also had some mental issues, and the trust officer was actually serving several roles. And they thought that he was okay. They were talking about doing away with, and this is 40 years ago, different sets of rules, but talked about doing away with perhaps the conservatorship. He seemed to be doing okay on his own, and then because it had been a couple of years since there'd been any incident. And then the trust officer got the call that he had taken all of his clothes, including the clothes that he was wearing, and set them on fire in the backyard, which would be a humorous scene in a movie, but a rather tragic scene in real life. So I'm wondering if there is any sort of term limit or time frame when somebody is perhaps when you're looking at, does this conservatorship need to exist? Is there any sort of time frame that says, well, we can't really look at anything that hadn't gone 3 years or something like that?
Okay, to answer question number one, or to address question number one, or the statement from number one, I enjoyed my time in St. Louis. That made me a Cardinals fan, so go Cards.
Yep.
Number two, if a child has money, then what is appointed for them is a guardian. So it's very similar to a conservatorship. They are required to have annual accountings as well and report to the court. Our office doesn't see them specifically. However, if Judge Kennedy asks us to do a review of a guardianship or look into a guardianship, we will. And that is very similar to a conservator. It's just for a child. And with regard to number three, there aren't any term limits to conservatorships. The conservatorship continues until it is terminated. And therefore, if the person with the disability dies or the respondent dies, the conservatorship will be terminated. If they regain their capacity, it will be terminated. If the conservator dies, another conservator is appointed. So the conservatorship, it does not terminate at the death of a conservator. And so there are no term limits in Tennessee. What I will say, however, a review hearing can be held at any time to determine if a conservatorship is no longer needed. And it doesn't require a lawyer. The person with the disability can call the court, ask for a review hearing, and by statute, they have to be given one.
Very good.
Thank
So
you.
I have another question in the chat. Are veterans benefits subject to conservatorship as well? And are those to be accounted for?
Yes, they are subject to conservatorship, sort of. So a person with a disability that's receiving VA benefits can be under a conservatorship. However, the VA has, you have to have a certification through the VA or go through the VA in order to manage those funds. And so either the conservator will use someone that the VA will allow to manage their funds, to help manage those funds, or the VA funds may be put into some sort of trust or some sort of other document or some sort of other instrument in order for those to be managed appropriately. The VA has their own safeguards in place, but a conservator would work alongside with the VA to carry out whatever their additional fiduciary responsibilities are.
Very good, very good. Okay. Any other questions? We're coming up on the end of this time with Amy. Right. Am I missing any hands? I want to make sure I'm not. There we go. Ed, you've asked your question, right? I see your hand still up. Okay. All right. Well, Amy, thank you so much for being with us this evening. You have just provided a wealth of understanding about conservatorships. And audience, thank you so much. All your fantastic questions and comments. I really
Alma
appreciate
has a question.
I want to ask one more question, Amy.
Sure.
If
Okay.
a person, let's say it's a veteran that gets limited benefits and the conservator does have to make an accounting, does the veteran get any cash money that he or she can use, like to buy their hearing aid batteries themselves, or any spending money at all? Are they allowed any cash?
Yes, with VAs and non-VAs, an individual can be allotted a certain amount of money by which to spend per month. That is determined by the conservator or by the court. Some people have more money than others given to them or allotted to them per month to use for whatever they choose to use,
Depending on their income then.
depending on their income.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mhm. Okay. All right. Jim, did I get everybody, Jim?
Yes, sure it is.
Yeah. Amy, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to give us?
I want to thank you for having me. I see down in the chat, someone asked, how can they contact me? Contact me at my office. So our website is ocm.nashville.gov. My email address is my name, amy.bryant@nashville.gov. And then we have a phone number that's 615-880-3355. I could be contacted in any of those ways. Additionally, if you forget any of that information, if you Google conservatorship in Tennessee, our office comes up. This is the only office of it, and it will come up, and you can get the contact information that way.
Thank you so much.
For answering your questions. I've enjoyed speaking with you all.
Yes, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate that. And please join us next week when we'll have our very own Jim Hawk to discuss the power of a great neighborhood newsletter. Remember, great neighborhoods don't happen by accident. Find your neighborhood passion and work hard to make your neighborhood a safe and vibrant place to live. Good night, everybody. Take
Good
care.
night. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Night, John Boy.